Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Why are we here? Why are we learning something called Dawah? And by the way, as a side note, Dawah has a lot of misconceptions. So you might get the image in your mind, okay, it's about handing out pamphlets, it's about proselytization, it's about just promoting your view, shoving it down other people's throats, being aggressive. But Dawah on a spectrum is much wider than that. But let's focus on the benefits first. Why would someone study Da'wah? Think about the question. Okay, let's narrow it down to maybe three things. And these are, by the way, I believe these are unrealized benefits of Da'wah that our community has very much overlooked, and that actually resolves a lot of issues that we're facing when it comes to our identity as Muslims. You know, what happens outside of the masjid ultimately affects our identity inside of the masjid. All of the media, everything we see at school, everything we interact with at work, all of our interactions with peers, with society, we ultimately will absorb ideas and constructs that we don't even realize we learned. It's almost like if you hang around a group of friends, you're going to inevitably absorb some of their language and characteristics. So Da'wah gives us a foothold, it gives us an identity, and we want to touch upon the three benefits of those. So the first thing I would say, what Da'wah does, it actually teaches you a skill set in regards to communication. How do you communicate your deen to someone? How do you articulate your deen? And by the way, not just to non-Muslims, but this is Dawah teaches us to communicate Islam to ourselves and even our fellow Muslims. So if you've ever seen someone who has very powerful communication skills, very persuasive communication skills, Dawah can actually, and I've seen this myself, can actually train someone and their communication skills to go from a level 2 to a level 8 or level 9 in a year or less. So if you've ever listened to a boring khutbah, or if you've ever wanted to be a more persuasive or compassionate speaker, or even a teacher or mentor, Dawah forces you to learn coaching skills. Okay, also, Dawah is not just about speaking. A huge part of Dawah is about listening. You need to listen to who you're talking to. When you're doing Dawah to someone, you're asking them their name. You're asking them about their background, how they came to certain conclusions about life, their origin, their purpose, their destination. So when you're in a conversation, you're not just waiting for your turn to speak. You're asking the person questions, understanding where they're coming from, and then based on that, choosing the right ayat, the right hadith, and trying to conceptualize for the person you're talking to, your audience, the message of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Okay, so number one, Dawah teaches you, it's knowledge. It's knowledge of articulating our deen to ourselves, first and foremost, removing ignorance from ourselves, and also clarifying things to society. Number two, what is the second benefit of Dawah? Actually, Dawah, included in Dawah is a little bit of a debate, mujadila. And the benefit of this is one learns critical thinking skills. So again, as I mentioned earlier, when you're living in any society, for that matter, any society, you are going to be thrown messages to you day in, day out, indirectly and directly. So it doesn't matter where you are. And there's statistics on this that we can find out how many advertisements the average person sees in a day. But you'll see messages that affect your consciousness, subliminal messages, ideas that you always are prone to and faced with. Now, there's an old saying, if you're not doing da'wah, then someone's doing da'wah to you. I'm going to say that again. If you are not doing da'wah, then someone is doing da'wah to you. How many of you believe this? Okay, fantastic. And so think about the Muslim community now for a second and our level of activism and how active we are in da'wah. And well, alhamdulillah, I want to say, living in this country is a blessing, and having these blessed masajid, our blessed imams, our blessed administrators of the masjid and management, because there is definitely many activities going on. I've seen open houses here in Canada. I've seen multiple dawah training workshops in various masajid, various halaqat happening, and all of these are complementary to our fundamental ibadat. And so, there's many things happening. At the same time, we do have an identity crisis because majority of Muslims in Canada might have a struggle with articulating their deen. They might have a struggle with accepting everything in their deen. They don't know what is required sometimes over their deen. And the great thing, again, this is an issue of debate. What does it come down to? It comes down to critical thinking, because people will tell you nowadays, this is not acceptable. This thing in Islam. Maybe let's give you a simple example. Not drinking alcohol. Not drinking alcohol is unacceptable because this is something that has become standard in the workplace, in society, and you can have a response to this. You can take it from multiple ways. You can say, here's the statistics on alcohol. You can say, here's what scientists have said about alcohol. You could say that here's many non-Muslims choose not to drink alcohol, but ultimately the best answer would be is, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about alcohol? What does the Quran say about alcohol? And from there, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rabbul Alameen? Okay, so the second benefit, in short, is it gives you critical thinking skills. It gives you the ability to question the question itself. And therefore, Muslims are no longer just a punching bag, absorbing everything that's around them. You need to be able to question what you hear, what you see. Otherwise, you're just going to be a subject and an object, absorbing everything around you like a sponge. And you're not in control of the conversation. I'll tell you something in business that you learn, which is, if you're in a sales or marketing conversation, those who control the questions control the conversation. I'll say that again. Those who control the questions control the conversation. Now, we don't want to dominate the conversation necessarily, but we want to be able to, if someone's going to ask us one question, we also should be able to ask the other side a question. And it's not to debate or challenge, but it's to do so in a polite, respectful, and compassionate manner. Inshallah ta'ala, with good akhlaq, good adab. So I hope that point is clear. The last thing is probably the most important, or if not equally important to the other two. These things are not mutually exclusive. The third point is the spiritual aspect. Okay? The prophets in the Quran, they debated, they gave da'wah, they struggled, regardless of the result sometimes. And da'wah is a spiritual journey. One of the things that you study in da'wah is the characteristics of the da'i. You study the characteristics of the da'i, which we'll talk about today. And just to break it down very quickly, we can reduce it to maybe three things: knowledge, worship, and action. Okay, that we act upon the knowledge that we learn. And or in other words, knowledge, spirituality, and volunteering or activism or getting involved in da'wah itself. So you want to, the reason why this is important is because sincerity, ikhlas, is so important for the da'i. Da'wah is a way to bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Da'wah is struggle. Sometimes it's going to be fun. Sometimes it's going to be enjoyable. Sometimes it's going to be enlightening. Other times it might even be a challenge or a struggle. But even that journey of that struggling through dawah is going to be spiritually enlightening. It's going to be spiritually fulfilling. It's going to bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you don't want to do dawah, or you find it uncomfortable, or you're scared to ever get into a conversation with someone, remember this: in order to develop a skill, you have to get out of your comfort zone. And this is a reminder to myself and to all of us. Any skill for that matter. You want to learn computer programming, you want to learn soccer or any sport. You can't just read a book on da'wah or read a book on that subject. You have to go to into the field. And so, whether you're in school or at work, you are going to be asked questions about Islam. And I find a lot of Muslims today, they'll just give very short and simple answers and say, you know what, Islam is just like every other religion. We're the same as Christians and Jews. Okay? Or they'll say, you know what, just believe whatever you want, and that's fine. The thing is with these questions, I find they are often said to push Islamophobia away. But wallahu alam, I find that they actually welcome and bring on Islamophobia into the community. Because first of all, this is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, or this is not what we learn from the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at all. Yes, of course we want to live in peace and cohesion and whatnot. Absolutely, without a doubt. This is a foremost responsibility of us as citizens, is to live peacefully side by side and be citizens of this nation and citizens of the world, the global ummah, and wish peace and security for all. But at the same time, if you were to say that Islam is just like every other religion, this can be a little bit misleading. This can be misunderstood. If you say things like just believe whatever you want to believe, again, this can be severely misunderstood. And it doesn't necessarily fall in line with our shahada, which is ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah, that nothing has the right to be worshipped. There is no God except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the final messenger. For who? For all of mankind. So it creates a problem. And so, a non-Muslim will go back home, they'll hear verses from the Quran, they'll hear a hadith, and they'll say, wait a minute, this is not what your book says. You Muslims are lying. You Muslims are doing taqiyya. You Muslims are doing propaganda. And so non-Muslims will actually respect you more if you tell the truth. I'm not saying to be rash or harsh or, confrontational. No, I'm not saying that. But what dawah teaches you to do, it teaches you to articulate your deen in a very respectful, compassionate, and loving manner. And so you can say to someone, this is what Islam says. This is what we believe. And have a dialogue with them. Ask them, why do you believe what you would believe? What's your background? How did you come to that conclusion? Let me get to know more about you. Where do you live? Build some common ground first. Make them somewhat your friend first, and then get into a discussion about, okay, here's what I believe. And then you can articulate Islam. It's not, you don't need to necessarily refute them or debate with them right away. And by default, we shouldn't be looking for a confrontation or debate. But sometimes they will challenge you and say, okay, well, why don't you eat pork? Explain that to me. And in this case, you can bring up especially if they come from a Christian background, ask them why Jesus Christ didn't eat pork. Ask them why the Prophet Moses never ate pork. And you can bring these questions to light and get their view. Ask them to explain it to you. So just like people ask Muslims questions and have posed questions about Islam, likewise, we want to also ask questions. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's so important for our identity. Because, again, if we say Muslims in Canada, mashallah, tabarakallah, I think they've done a decent job in pushing Islamophobia away. At the same time, Islamophobia has increased phenomenally, substantially over the years in Canada with various media outlets and pundits. And I believe that there's a reason for that. I believe that perhaps it's because we haven't been giving dawah, we haven't been proactive. We've kind of taken somewhat of a reactive stance. And the other thing is that we also need to realize is that Islamophobia is sometimes going to be inevitable. Ultimately, we look for creating alliances, relationships, bridge building in the community. But sometimes Islamophobia is going to be inevitable. Sometimes you are just going to have to face confrontations. You can't please everyone, right? And Muslims need to understand this, that this is the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were the number one recipients of Islamophobia. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was the number one recipient of Islamophobia. So I want to thank each and every one of you. I want to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless this masjid. I like to do these things in tandem with the, this is just the last thing I'm going to say before we get into our workshop. I like to do these things in tandem with the imams, with the support of the masjid, the support of the board. I want to encourage each and every one of you to attend this masjid, to support your local masajid and support your local imams. Always ask your imams and your masajid and the admin, what can I do to help you? Show your appreciation, thank them, jazakumullahu khair, because they are the center of our community. The scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. We wouldn't know our deen today. We wouldn't know right and wrong. We wouldn't know our obligations if it wasn't for the masajid, the imams. And unlike the Catholics, we don't pray to our imams, but we can and should pray for them. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them. I hope to also learn from the shuyukh in this short workshop and seminar. I hope to learn from the Quran and the Sunnah. And if I say anything against the Quran and Sunnah, I would like the Imam Shayukh to correct me. Barakallahu feekum wa jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.